Graham Brown. We are talking to some of the newest and the best podcast hosts in Asia. Delighted to be joined by Ling Ling Tai. Ling Ling, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for inviting me here, Graham.
It's great to have you here. The Leaders of Learning podcast, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
You're not just a podcast, but you're also a podcast educator by trade. So we'll talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's more of a side hustle because
a side hustle.
Yeah, it's a side hustle. And it's because when I started my podcast show, a lot of people came up to me and inquire about, what is podcast?
Yeah.
You'd be surprised that a lot of people in Singapore and the rest of Southeast Asia, they don't know what podcast is. So when I talk about podcasting, they're like, oh, what is it? What is it?
What do they think it is?
I have to explain that it's an on-demand radio. So you don't listen to radio in the car, but rather you select the show that you want to listen to, the topic that you're interested in, a particular episode, download it on your phone and listen it on your commute. Mm-hmm. So that's where my educator background comes in, because I have been in education for more than 10 years. More than 10 years.
As what? As a teacher, corporate trainer?
Corporate trainer. So I've been in the technology space. I've been in the travel space as a corporate trainer. So I have a training and learning and development background. So I thought it's a good mix between me as a corporate trainer and helping to create public awareness of what podcast is. Mm-hmm.
So you do a lot, I guess, in your life as a trainer, you did a lot of presenting to people and showing people in a way. Now, as a podcast host, similarly, you're having to communicate with people in the public sphere. And I guess where I'm going with this is that you're Asian, you're from Malaysia, which I've learned today, which is great. You're Malaysian, you're female, obviously. There are not a lot of female Asians in this space, in podcasting. I know there should be a lot more.
I wish there are a lot more.
Yeah, what's going on? Why?
I don't know. I really don't know. But what I'm trying to do with my podcast show and reaching out to people is to say that, it doesn't matter if you're female or you're Asian, but if you have something passionate about, why not speak up about it?
Do you think it's tough, though? I mean, especially here in Southeast Asia. Obviously, I come from outside of this world, where we're sort of a lot more used to standing up, and even, for example, after school, like when you go to school after summer holidays and you come back, they get all the kids to stand up and say, what did you do in summer holidays? And they all do like a presentation. So even at a young age, we're constantly presenting. So when you stick a microphone in front of us, it's like not a lot of, it's not too difficult for us to do this stuff. Yet here in Asia, I think a lot of people like to sit and wait for somebody else to make the first move, don't they?
Well, I agree. Part of it is the influence of our education system, because our education system doesn't encourage the young ones to stand up and present, at least in my generation anyway. I'm not too sure about the education system now. I was quite fortunate that at a young age I had a chance to live in Vancouver for a while. So my primary age, I lived in Vancouver for 4 years.
Oh, wow. Good.
And I went through the whole thing that you've mentioned about how teachers give you a topic or you choose something and they ask you to prepare and present. So I had, experience in presenting since I was really, really young.
How old were you when you were in Canada?
It was like from 7 till 10 or 11, something like that.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and then I returned back to Malaysia. Then.
So you had that in you. So I'm wondering, when you actually started your podcast, firstly, did you have any sort of fears or doubts about starting it? Because I think a lot of people, maybe people who are listening, are thinking, I want to start a podcast. But that first step is quite hard.
I think for me, I was really clear in my mind why I wanted to start my podcast show. Because at that point in time, I've decided also to become an entrepreneur, so a solopreneur, in a sense that I've started my own corporate training outfit in order to become a learning and development kind of consultant to help organizations figure out how to foster a learning environment to encourage their employees to put learning and development and career development in the forefront. So when I was doing my research in the market, I realized that a lot of organizations, they still have the traditional mindset of learning, which is the way to do career development is by shoving a lot of people in a room with a facilitator, with a trainer, or with an expert. They'll be in that room for half a day, entire day, or for a few days. And they expect the employees to go back to the workplace and become awesome. But that's not how learning works based on my career. So when I started the Leaders of Learning podcast, it's more to educate my clients to bring public awareness that learning doesn't have to be in the classroom. It can also be in multiple ways. One form is by podcasting. One form is by online education platforms. Another way is by feedback with your peers, feedback with your managers. There's all sorts of ways to do it. So when I started my podcast, it's mostly to create that awareness that learning can be more than just in the classroom. And in turn, I was hoping it could also help me with my business as a corporate trainer.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you about your podcast.
Sure.
And what it's done for you as well. Go back to that learning part as well. It seems to me like you're talking to a lot of people out there about learning.
Right.
There's a lot of people who have embedded and very habitual thoughts about learning. It must be tough, isn't it, when you're going out there and talking about, look, we've got to change.
Yeah.
There's a better way of doing. Where do you get the motivation, the drive to do that? Because you're not always facing people, I really get this, Ling Ling. I'm on board. Sometimes you're like, I don't know about this. Where does the motivation come to deal with all that sort of, I'm not saying negativity, but there's doubt, isn't there, about learning?
Yeah, there are a lot of doubt. But what I strongly believe in learning, because essentially everyone wants to become better at something, whatever they're passionate about. And I've been in this public speaking training space since I was like a little girl, because even after that, I've been in secondary school, I've been training people on different things. I suppose it's just my passion. I just want to see people grow, and I know there are better ways to do it, and I want people to be able to become better themselves, no matter what way it is.
So why did you choose a podcast as one way of doing that?
I love listening to podcasts. I think there is a great future for podcasting, especially in Asia, because I know there are many great podcast shows, but they originate mainly from the States or from English-speaking countries like Australia or the UK. But a part of me also feels that, you know what, there's so many experts out there, so many people with lots of knowledge and experience in Asia, but we don't hear from them. And I thought, why not be one of the first few to share my thoughts on what I am passionate about, and to interview other people within the region of what they are passionate about, and to show that, you know what, you have a voice, you have an experience. I'm showing an example that you also can do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's great that you are doing it. Now that you are doing it, how are you finding people react to and contact you? Because you're blazing a trail, right?
I hope so.
I know you're right. I mean, you mentioned there's a lot of podcasts, and I'm interested to learn about what kind of podcasts you listen to as well, that originate in the States and the UK and Australia and so on, because of all the reasons that we talked about. That education makes it easier for people to at least stand up and talk. They like the sound of their voice, right? So it's easier. And yet even here in Asia, if you look at the podcasts that are going on, there's a big bias towards people from outside like myself who bring that to Asia. Yet for you to be local and to set up a podcast and start it, you must become like a lightning rod for people who then think, wow, Ling Ling's doing it. She's just like me. How do I do that? Are you getting that now?
Yeah, that's why the podcast educator has become a side gig, because I do have people approaching me and ask, how do I start a podcast? How do you do it? So thankfully, last year we got funding from LearnSG, and they gave us funding to run some workshop. So we use that as an opportunity to create public awareness about what podcast is. And I believe podcasting has so much to grow and so much potential in Asia. And most of it is because people don't know what podcast is. So people won't listen to podcasts if they don't know what it is.
Right.
So I think the first step is to create an awareness of what is podcast. It's just as simple as that.
So when people come to your workshops, what are they looking for? What are they hoping to get out of it?
All sorts of things. How to start one on their own. What are the challenges? What are the fantastic podcasts out there? Some of them are actually looking for local podcast shows as well, because it's not as easy to find. If you go online and search for Singapore podcast, it's not so easy to find.
No, there's not a lot. No, there's a handful, maybe.
Yeah.
We can name them. We probably know them all as well. And what are the big challenges in that? Because you can show them, microphones, kit, setup, technical stuff's easy. What's the sort of the mental challenges in getting people to start?
Confidence mostly.
Yeah.
Whether it's the right thing to do or not.
Right.
Whether people will judge them for speaking up I believe speaking up is really powerful. Saying what you really think, what your opinion is what your passion is, what your cause is really powerful. And to do that from a personal space, I think requires courage. So not everyone is confident enough to speak up.
Right.
From my experience anyway.
It's easy for you because you were educated in Canada where you were taught to speak up.
Yeah.
How about me, and I'm a local here, for example? It's harder for me. What can I do? How can I speak up?
Little steps.
Yeah.
Little steps. You can do multiple recordings. You don't necessarily need to publish it. Just get used to it.
Little steps.
Little steps.
Yeah.
And the important thing is your message. It's not really about you. You are the vehicle of the message that you want to deliver.
What's your message?
My message? We all have an opportunity to learn and grow and become the best of who we are.
Right.
We can do it outside the classroom.
Yeah. Good. What do you mentioned podcasts as well from the outside and some local ones. What do you listen to? Because obviously you use podcasting yourself to convey your message, but also to learn from other people as well. What do you listen to? Is there any sort of notables?
Wide range, because I have a lot of interest. I consider myself, what do they call it? Multi-talented, multi-passion kind of person.
Yeah, that's the only way to be. You've got to be these days, haven't you?
Yeah,
There's so much going on.
Yeah, otherwise how do you link disparate things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I listen from Science Versus to Hidden Brain to The Guilty Feminist, Duolingo, local podcast, Do Not Dwell. That's one of them that's coming up.
Yeah.
Economical Rice.
Right.
I also listen to that.
What do you like about all of those? I mean, they're all very different. What do you like about their styles?
I like that there are different styles. I don't like to listen to one style. I'm the kind of person who like to try new things because I'm curious. So I like conversations in a group. I also like well-researched stories. I just like all of them, really. And I choose them mostly because of the topic that I'm interested in.
Right. So what's the one that you've listened to most recently?
Most recently, Duolingo, because I'm trying to learn Spanish.
So is that a Spanish-English podcast?
Yeah, a bilingual podcast.
Right.
So they have someone speaking in Spanish of a Latin American story, and they have someone to also narrate it in English as well.
Yeah. So they'll read you the Spanish, and then you'll get the English afterwards?
Yeah, so it's not direct translation word for word, but the way they produce it is quite elegant in a sense that you have a Spanish speaker telling the story in Spanish in its own natural way, and to accompany it is an English narrator as well.
Do you like having lots of different things on the go, like in terms of learning interests? Because you're learning Spanish. And
yeah, way too much. I want to do too much in life.
Right. Is that a challenge? Because, some people, I guess one of the reasons why they don't get round to listening to podcasts is they can't justify why they should do it. It's easier just to go onto YouTube and look at something, or, why don't just read it on a blog? We get all that kind of, I don't do podcasts because, I don't have 20 minutes in a day. In the same way people would say, nobody would ever say, for example, I don't have 10 minutes to drink a coffee. People will sit in Starbucks for like 3 or 4 hours, right?
Yeah.
So people do have time. They just have to kind of like rationalize it. For yourself, all these different kind of like disparate interests and your passions for learning. Does that make sense? Or do you have to, like, some people say, I just want to learn about, I'm a polyglot, I'm into languages, I just want to do that, and that's all I do. But you have different things on the go.
Yeah, I have different things. And I attribute it mostly to my upbringing, because my parents were clever enough, or I was fortunate enough to move from one place to another where I've been exposed to different forms of education, the Asian way of being educated and the Western way of being educated. And that in itself encouraged me to pursue things that I'm curious in. Which is why, like, I've got all these, disparate interests. I tap into a bit of Spanish. I tap into a bit of podcast. And I suppose that's why I'm in the career I'm in as a corporate trainer.
There's something about that, isn't there? That to be able to communicate to people, you need to be able to see lots of different ways of the world. You've lived in Canada, you lived in Malaysia, you've lived in Singapore.
I've also lived in the UK for a while. I did my master's.
Oh, you did your master's? Where did you do your master's?
In north of London, in a place called Hertfordshire.
Right, I know.
Yeah, you know there?
Yeah. I've never lived there, but I know of it roughly.
So I was there 4 years before moving to Singapore.
Okay.
And before going into primary, I had the opportunity to live in Australia as well for a couple of years.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I see it a lot here in Singapore, like people who've lived in many different places and people who've grown up in different places. Even I think about my son, he's lived in Japan, he's lived in Spain, he's lived in England, and now he lives in Singapore, right?
Yeah.
And I think in terms of how that prepares as an education in itself for the future, like we're going to need more people like that, like yourself, who in a way are generalists.
Yeah.
You know, there's a specialist who just knows everything about this one subject, right? Whereas a generalist has this ability to join the dots in the Steve Jobs style, joining the dots, right? But there's a real value because I think there's less and less of that, right? You know, that people can see, whether it's like connecting AI with education, with, you know, whatever it may be, the Asian century, all these big meta themes. Yet we have a lot of people just focused on like data science or very specific educational areas. So you've got this sort of general view of the world, which is great because then you know, for example, this is how they do it over here. This education system. This is not just the way it should be done here, right?
Yeah.
And they can bring in new ideas.
Definitely.
So, you know, as an outsider, in a way, I think there's a real benefit to communicating with people. You can see how things work in different places.
Perspectives, yeah. I disagree, though, that, how to say, there are less of a generalist out there. I think there are plenty of generalists like me, if that's what you want to call me. It's just that society is built around specialists. We prize the specialists. We celebrate the specialists because it's easier to associate a person with one speciality rather than multiple specialities or multiple interests. And I think, in a way, it is because it's efficient to do that when it comes to business growth or productivity, to specialize in something. But if given the opportunity, I think there are plenty of people who love multiple things. If given the opportunity.
Well, let's put that in the context of learning.
Yeah.
So, leaders of learning. What are some of the themes you've talked about in the podcast? I mean, you've got it everywhere from like blockchain, like recently, like learning on blockchain and so on. So you've gotten like really into the weeds of technology as well.
Yeah.
What do you enjoy talking about on that podcast?
So with blockchain, actually for the leaders of learning, I try to make the topic as varied as possible, which is quite suited to my character. So it's a mix of technologies, a mix of software learner is another. The most listened to episode of mine is titled Finding Balance, which I interviewed a psychologist or skills. It's a mix of training or facilitation methodology. Blockchain is one of them, therapist, and he talks about the disconnect between who you are as a person on the inside and what society expects of you, and how do you reconcile that. I believe that particular episode is most downloaded because that hits a sore spot with a lot of people that reside in Asia, whereby we're educated to be a certain way or expected to be a certain way, but inside we want to do other things. We have other interests to pursue.
Does it resonate with you?
To a certain degree, yes, but I'm glad I've grown up.
Right.
And I found a way to reconcile.
Right. Do we ever finish growing up?
No, we don't actually.
Isn't that what learning is, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that particular episode, Finding Balance, because on the surface, that's not educational learning, right? But it is, I guess. You're going to tell me.
It is related in a sense that my listeners, who I target, are mostly people that are based in Asia, and I hope. And it's getting them to think that what is it that you're learning now? Does it resonate with who you want to be? And if it doesn't, how can you reconcile that? Because we can't say, I'm going to give up learning this, because we have family members and friends and even, colleagues or bosses who expects us to learn or shape ourselves in a particular way. And yet, if we continue on that path, it will create a sense of emotional or psychological dissonance within ourselves. So how do we deal with that? Do we continue on the path, or do we scope it out or shape it so that it resonates more closely to or align more closely to who we actually are? Or do we justify within ourselves that, okay, this is the path, I'm just going to follow it?
It
So
seems
it's getting people to think.
Asian thing as well, isn't it? Like it's a strong Asian theme.
Mm.
We all know about Asian families and the emphasis on education, especially Chinese Asian families, right?
Yeah.
And I suppose if you can say the West, if I'm allowed to say that, is that people now are more open to kids experimenting with learning and careers and going off and, finding happiness or finding a career which you enjoy doing. Whereas here there's a lot of vested interest, especially you mentioned the family, for example, like, make sure that their firstborn get a really good education as a professional. And so if they then start talking about fulfillment, there's a lot of alarm bells going off now, right? That's the family tradition. That's the family honor now at stake, right? So, maybe for those people who don't get that, outside of that, who haven't experienced that, to your audience, do they feel that pressure? Is that real for them? Like, I mean, for me growing up, it's like, just do what you want. Fine, if you want to be an AI scientist, go and do that, right? They didn't care as long as I was happy.
Yeah. Oh, how do I explain this? Well, because I've experienced it myself growing up, and I believe it's a learning journey for both the generation who has to go through that pressure from their family to be in a certain way or to follow a certain career, but it's also a learning journey for the generation who wish well for their kids, because in their mindset, it's probably generational and cultural if we talk about it. So my parents' generation and generation older, they came out from World War II. So their biggest struggle is poverty, is trying to build a more stable life. And because they've gone through that experience, they want their children to continue with that same sense of stability. So in that mindset, they believe professions such as engineering, accounting, whatever it may be, can provide financial stability for their kids. So my generation and younger, we have not gone through World War. We've not gone through poverty. So we don't understand why there's so much need for security based on particular careers. So therein lies the disconnect between what the parents want for the kids and what the kids want for themselves. So it's a learning journey for both the generations to figure out that, financial security is one of it, but there's also happiness and fulfillment and living up to whatever you're passionate and interested in.
So when your audience listen to these messages, you must have people reach out to you.
Yeah.
Podcasting aside, about the whole career fulfillment, that area, education, family expectations.
Yeah.
What kind of messages do you get?
That it's spot on, mostly. Yeah, that really spoke to them.
And what sort of terms do they express that to you?
Exactly as what I said. Yeah, that's spot on. It really spoke to me. It resonated with me. It really explained how my life is.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a lot deeper, right? When they say it explains how my life is, right? It's not just a podcast, is it?
No.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that particular episode made an impact, because I hope that it gets people to start thinking about their life and how they want to lead it. We only have one life.
So they say.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, when you look for guests for your podcast, what do you look for now, knowing what really works and what your audience wants?
I'm still experimenting with a wide range of topics. So I believe the ones that get most listens are soft skills related, or things that are relevant to my audience's life. And that's also part of my goal anyway. Learning doesn't have to be in the classroom. It could be just a daily experience, and you can learn from that too. So I still have a mix between technology-related topics, learn tech, as well as soft skill-related topics. How do you build a community? That's a topic that's coming up. How do you build your own self-confidence? That's also a learning journey for some people. How do you build your self-confidence? And I've got another topic coming up, is how do you learn to speak up? If you feel strongly about something, how do you gain that confidence to speak about the things that matter to you? And these are the topics I believe society in general in Asia is important to talk about. If I don't talk about it, no one else will do it. We'll be sitting and waiting for someone else to talk about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a space, there's a hole, isn't there, that won't be filled by you not being there.
Yeah.
So when you, when you're sort of creating future podcasts, how do you go about it? You know the kind of themes that you want to talk about. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of podcast hosts, and there's a whole range of different ways of approaching this. One is, I just want to talk about that, so therefore I'm going to do that. And then all the way over to someone like Bernard Leong, who does Analyze Asia, who would say, I know if I do a China podcast, because he'll do a wide range of themes, I get a 20% uplift in my audience. You know, there's no right or wrong way about it. I'm just curious. People have different ways of doing it. How do you do it in terms of picking out your themes?
Oh, the way I run Leaders of Learning is I determine one season. So now my season is 10 episodes, and that fits in with my other work, my main job as a corporate trainer. I always try to make sure that within 10 episodes, I have gender equality. So 5 women, 5 men. Some of it are recommended through my own network, some of my guests. Some topics, because I also want to make it sort of equal between technology, methods of facilitation and training, as well as soft skills. So I try to balance out. So a lot of it is a jigsaw puzzle, trying to fit things together based on recommendations from network, a bit of Google search on my end, and reaching out a few degrees of people within the network and things like that. It's a mix of everything. But I want to make sure that my podcast show demonstrates diversity. And that's, demonstrates diversity.
Why do you want to do that?
I believe diversity is really important. Someone must show that we don't only listen to American podcasts. They're not the pedestal. We can create our own pedestal by showing that we have experts who are Asian, who are Indian, who are young and who are old, who are broad range of people. And if we don't get them out, people would always think that the experts come from the States or the UK or Australia. When in Asia itself, we have a lot of brilliant people here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good. And let's sort of get to one of the core questions that people often ask, and I'm sure you get this as well when people ask about podcasting: money. So, I've heard all the different business models. We have different business models here at Asia Tech Podcast as well. Making money out of podcasts. When people ask you that, what's your answer?
Do you make money out of Asia Tech?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Mind if you share?
Yeah, absolutely. So we get people to pay to come on the show. We have a show where people pay. We get sponsorship. And we do recruitment events. We have a production agency.
Wow.
And people can hire the studio.
Wow.
Yet, to be honest, we're probably quite rare. I would say of the 17 hosts that I've just done, that series, I would say most don't make money out of the podcast. They do the podcast to make money out of the upsell, which is, for example, like Radu Palamario, who does a logistics podcast. He's a recruiter. So he uses that to meet people and to talk about logistics. And then people know, oh, he's the logistics guy. Therefore, if I need recruitment, I'll go to him. Tim Romero is who does the Disrupt Japan podcast. He actually had sponsorship on it. Sarah Ran Yong from ASB in Malaysia, she won't make money out of it, but she'll use it as her CV. Right, so once she's completed her course, she can go out and speak to different companies and look what I've done and look who I've spoken to. So yeah, we make money out of it. We have to pay people around here, right, and run this place. But I think that it seems that most in my conversations, most people make money out of something else and use the podcast to get attention and trust with people and to build relationships. So
that's very fortunate of you to be able to earn money from your podcast.
Right, it's our business, yeah. So yeah, we're a podcast business. We're a business that has podcasts, right?
Excellent.
But I think most people don't make money out of it. Yeah.
No.
Do people ask you that question about making money out of it? Or?
Yeah, quite
How
often.
do you answer it?
I just say I don't make money because my goal is not really to make money from the podcast. Although if there is money in it, I would I'll gladly have another source of income.
Mm.
When I started my podcast show, it's mostly to reach out to experts in my industry, which I didn't have access to, and use it as a form of a informal press pass, if I could say it that way. And since, it gained popularity, to my surprise, I was able to access people I haven't had access to, and that's the purpose of me having my podcast show.
Absolutely. I think that's a great reason. You get to speak to people that you normally wouldn't, right?
That's right.
I mean, I'm speaking to you now, so as an example, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a great tool to build your network, get to meet people, learn stories as well.
Yeah. It's a learning journey for myself, because when I get access to certain people, I get to ask questions that I normally wouldn't get to ask unless I search Google or something. But once you have the person in front of you, I learned so much from them. And also, when you maintain contact with them, then you have access to their network too, and all the other fantastic people that they know.
Absolutely. When somebody comes on your podcast, they're going to share that, tell their network. That's how it works, isn't it? And you've created something together as well, which is important, isn't it? I mean, if you have a cup of coffee with somebody, you have hundreds, right? But if you do a podcast, they'll always remember you, right? It'll be there forever.
Yeah.
When you sit and have conversations with people, do you ask questions normally you wouldn't ask without microphones? Does it give you superpowers?
Does it give me superpowers? Yeah, it does. It does give me superpowers.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you go into areas you normally wouldn't? Because the areas you talk about are quite sensitive here in Asia, right? Are you able to ask questions that people wouldn't normally talk about over a coffee?
It's mostly around their expertise and not so much in their personal life, because the theme of my podcast is really to help my listeners to understand that topic better and at least get the first few steps into whatever that they're trying to learn or build for themselves. So it'll be questions around their motivations, why did they do what they do? That's probably the most personal one. And the rest of it is mostly around if someone wants to become more confident, or if someone wants to, for example, find balance in their life, what are the steps that they need to take? And then hopefully they'll share some of their personal stories. If not, I'll probe them. Oh, how did you come about that? So it's really simple questions, I think. But somehow I believe I built the rapport and relationship with them so that they're open enough to share all the personal stories that they have in the podcast.
You built the rapport before the podcast?
Yes.
So they trust you? Yeah.
I reach out to them first to gain permission and see if they're okay to
So these
be
people
part
you
of my
don't know?
podcast. No, I don't know.
Right, but you build a rapport with them before the podcast. How would you do that?
Sometimes I reach out to them by email, and we'd have a Zoom call if they're not in Singapore. If they're in Singapore, I'd have a coffee with them. I'll come up with a concept of the episode with them to make sure that they're comfortable, and I'll probe and ask, is there some stories you can share here and there?
Right.
And when they say okay, I'll ask that on the podcast show.
Right.
So it's a little bit more effort than just interviewing them and things like that.
So does that mean that you can't do as many as, I guess you're doing more quality rather than quantity if you're going to have quite a personal approach to that and actually sit with your guests and, go through the plan. How many podcasts are you doing on average in a year?
In a year? I've only done it for a year. So it's
right.
my
How
first year
Yeah, well
anniversary.
done. Congratulations.
I think we've already done 20-something episodes.
20-something. So about every
2 or 3 weeks?
Yeah, every 2 weeks. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you able to maintain the consistency?
I do it seasonal. So what I do is I release one season on a consistent bi-weekly basis. Then I'll take a couple of months break to do some production before I release it again.
Right.
So
You're doing everything yourself?
Yeah, I am. I'm doing everything myself, which is a lot of work.
It is, yeah.
As a side hustle. Well, I don't earn money from it, but
yeah,
I
you're enjoying it, like doing all the editing and stuff like that.
I do, yeah.
It's cool. Especially at that sort of volume, it's doable, isn't it? I mean, you're dealing with a big inbox of work. You can kind of work through it at your pace. Plus, you've done these conversations, so it's good to listen back to them as well.
Yeah.
And where does it go from here? Where would you like to see Leaders of Learning go as a podcast? Is it continue what you're doing? Would you like to take it in new directions? Would you like to experiment with new things? What else would you like to learn yourself about podcasting?
In terms of podcasting, I would experiment with more topics, so different topics, maybe a different format in the episode, because currently my format is like a teaser at the beginning, a bit of a narration to give it some context of the topic, and then it goes straight into the interview. So I'd be interested to experiment with different forms of structure for the episode, different types of topics to see which, it sits with my audience and listeners. What else? Yeah, that's kind of it.
Yeah, just optimizing it rather than doing anything radically different.
No, nothing radically different at the top of my head at the moment. Yeah.
Good. Well, I wish you all the best success going forward into year 2.
Yeah, year 2. Yay!
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you made it through the hump. I think there's a hump about 6 podcasts, 6 to 10.
Why 6 to 10?
I think people go into podcasting with a lot of, excitement.
Mm-hmm.
And then they realize actually it's hard work.
It is.
What they don't see is all the editing and the hustling that goes behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from, editing the Audacity file or whatever it might be to hosting it, getting it out there, and then getting new guests as well, and then onboarding guests.
Yeah.
All that sort of, the back office of the podcast is unseen, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody goes into a podcast, they can, through motivation and excitement alone, they can get through 6, and then I see them drop off. So between 6 and 10, they start to sort of, I was doing it every week, and now it's every 2 weeks and every 3 weeks, and then it grinds to a halt. So if you can do 20 something, that's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. And we want to see more. We want to see a good second year. So all the best with that.
Thank you very much.
Let's give a shout out before you go to Leaders of Learning. Where do people find it?
Well, people find it on my website, because the Leaders of Learning is on my website, www.culturespark.co/podcasts.
Culturespark.co?
Yeah, /podcast. That's the name of my company.
Excellent. Ling Ling, it's great having you in, and thank you for sharing your journey with us. And
thank you for having me, Graham.
Yeah, it's good. And, pleased to see finally that we have some local voices speaking up. Exactly. And I'm hoping as well that anybody listening or watching this podcast and inspired by Ling Ling's story to reach out to you, what would be the easiest way? I know you got would it be through the website, or if you have a preferred way that
you
people
can email me.
Okay.
Yeah, my email is ling, Ling, @culturespark.co.
Excellent. Say that you've listened to this and you feel motivated to do your own thing and speak up, right? What are the baby steps, the easy steps that they can take to get going on this journey, right? Because they look at you and think, oh, well, it's easy because you're up here and you've done 20 odd, but you start somewhere, don't you? So.
Yeah, you have to start somewhere. Everyone has their own way of starting.
Excellent.
You have to find your way.
Good. Well, thank you, Ling Ling, for coming in today. That's Ling Ling Tai, everybody, the host of the Leaders of Learning podcast. We'll put all the details in the show notes. All the best for year 2.
You too. Thank you.